All right, let's return to some editing. So everybody get back into Bridge and get to the Chapter 7 folder that we downloaded. And we're going to work on the tutorial of fixing shots with a dull gray sky. So how many of you have taken Pretty Landscapes and Sky as boring and dull and gray and icky? Yeah.
Which chapter?
Chapter 7. Okay. So the tutorial that we're going to look at next, so the first thing that we did was the graduated filter where we rolled that down and we made the sky look better that way. That's one way of doing it. The version that we're going to do, that was in Camera Raw. The version that we're going to do now, we're going to do in Photoshop. We're actually going to open two images. We're going to open number 2, Dull Sky, and number 2, Dull Sky 2. So the Dull Sky and Sky Picture are the two that we're going to open. So you should have those two open in Photoshop in your tabs. The image that we're going to work to improve is the one called Dull Sky. So we're going to take a peek at that. And we're going to have that open. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at, this is a fairly boring sky, right? Even pulling down the graduated filter on this would not do much because it's pretty boring and gray. So the first thing we're going to do is make a selection of the sky. The magic wand tool is not going to work too well because there's a lot of variation here and then it might slip into the water. So the tool that we're going to use is the quick selection tool. And remember with this one, it's always adding to your selection. So as we run across right to left, across the sky, it's going to put the marching ants where they need to be. And if you zoom in a little and look, it might have gotten a little carried away and it might have selected down into the water a little bit that you didn't want. So you can always make your brush smaller, hold down the Option key, and remove those pixels down here in the waterline so that we do just have our sky chosen. So we should have marching ants around all parts of the sky with our quick selection tool. All right, the goal here is to make it look pretty, but the one thing that we want to do is expand it a little bit so that there's not a hard edge from the sky into whatever, like if we didn't get it perfect, which I can tell actually looking right now, there's a spot right here that's not the best selection, so I might want to grow that a little. But what we want to do is expand it a little bit. So we're going to do Select, Modify, Expand, and we're going to expand it by 2 to 3 pixels. And that's just going to push our marching ants, as you can see, because I'm zoomed in, a little bit down into the landline, if you will. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to that other picture. So go to the tab that you have open of the other sky picture. And here we just have a fabulous sky. We have really dark blue sky at the top, and we have a lighter but rich blue down at the bottom. So what we need to do here is take our eyedropper. So take your eyedropper that we're going to sample colors with, and we're going to click once on the brightest blue area, which is way down here near the point where the building is, down in the lower corner. So sample that color blue. Then what we want to do is swap out our color swatches. If we look over at the bottom of our toolbar, we have that color blue sampled on top and black on the bottom. We want to swap those, so you either can push X on your keyboard or that little double arrow, and that's going to put the black swatch on top and the blue that we sampled on the bottom. With the black one on top, we're going to go and sample the dark blue way up high in the sky to fill that black swatch with this dark blue color instead. So we made our 2 swatches be, this dark color of sky is our foreground color, and the background color is this light blue, even though it's dark, it's a rich color. So however you want to go about sampling those and switching your swatches, go ahead and get those 2 colors of blue lined up. Then we're going to go back to our original image. The only reason that we use this was to get realistic sky colors sampled and not guess what we think sky looks like. Now we're going to come back to our dull sky picture. Zoom out a little bit so I can see our whole picture here. And with this one, we are going to go to the Layers panel and add a new blank layer by clicking on the Create New Layer at the bottom. So we're going to go to our Layers panel, make a new layer. So here is our transparent layer that's floating on top right now. We're going to switch to our Gradient tool. Letter G will get you there, but otherwise on the toolbar, it's right here, the gradient tool. And your gradient tool is going to use whatever two colors are in your color chip. So we're going to click and drag from the top down to the bottom of our selection up in the sky. Holy moly. Not what I expected to see at all.
Completely different result.
Oh, that's why. Huh. Evidently the last tutorial in gradients that we did, I played with this thing up front here. What we want is a foreground to background gradient.
I think that one's better.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And you're going to click and drag down with a foreground to background gradient. So it's going to apply that dark blue to light blue inside where your marching ants are. How realistic does this look? Not so much, right? So we need to do something to fix this. I'll come around and troubleshoot in a minute. But obviously, we've got some problems. So the opacity is one thing we can tweak right away. So the opacity of this layer, we can continue to pull back. And then we start to see some of the clouds coming through. So that could help. Maybe, maybe not. The other thing that we can do is let's deselect the marching ants, so Command D. What else can we do to this layer to tweak how it's reacting with the one underneath it? Besides opacity, what else can we do? Blend modes. Yep. So the blend mode right here is normal. Let's try some different blend modes and see if we can get something better. Lighten, overlay, soft light, difference. Difference is kind of weird. It adds that pink. So somewhere in there, you might find one that you think works well. And remember, you can continue to tweak the opacity and the blend modes. So that still looks pretty fake, but there, if I back that one off, I did a color burn and I backed the opacity way off. That's not bad. Okay. So you have to play with the combination of the two. Yeah, dissolve's not so good. You have to play with the combination of opacity and blend modes. And again, the reason we pulled up that second photo was so that we could sample true sky colors. Often when we think of what sky blue is, it may or may not be right, but we know that those colors look good. If you wanted it to look stormy or a different, that weird greenish yellow hue that we get right before a hailstorm or something, you could sample different colors. But that's a nice and easy way of using blend modes. Soft light, overlay, any of those could work very well. So find the one that makes you happy and adjust your picture accordingly. All good with that one? All right, let's close those two files. You don't have to save them. And the next tutorial we're going to do in this chapter is the very next one, the Dodge and Burn JPEG. We've hardly really looked at this tool ever in Photoshop. So underneath the gradient tool, we have blur, sharpen, and smudge. Those are three tools that are nested together. And let's see, where's the next tool down, depending on which one it is, you either have the Dodge tool, the Burn tool, or the Sponge tool. I'm going to switch to the Dodge tool. I'd asked this before, how many of you worked in a darkroom ever, a real traditional darkroom? Okay, do you remember when the light's shining down, how you'd put your hand in the way to either dodge or burn, make more light hit or less light hit? Exact same thing, except we're doing it digitally instead. So we're going to dodge and burn this image to brighten certain areas. So you can guess that all these shadows, we're going to allow more exposure in here, and we're going to darken up the upper areas a little bit. There's lots of ways of doing this with masking or other options, but we're going to try a dodge and burn instead. We're going to do a Command J to duplicate our layer, so we're working non-destructively, and we have a copy of this. So on our layer 1 that's a copy, we're going to take the Dodge tool, and we're going to make our cursor pretty big, and we're going to start painting around in this lower area. We're going to dodge, which is adding more light down here in the lower parts. This is a buildup. Every time you go over it, it's adding more to it. It's not like a one and done. So you're painting over it with more and more light. And you can get carried away too. If you got too carried away, you could start over You could change the opacity of this layer to bring it down so that more of your background layer is showing through. But you can definitely brighten up using this dodge tool. Yep.
What is this tool?
It depends which one you have up. It's either it's about halfway down on the tools, 2 underneath the gradient. Dodge, burn, and sponge are all nested together. So that was our dodging adjustment. Let's go ahead and take your background layer and make a copy of that one. And on that one, we can do some burning if we want to see what that looks like. But again, they're 2 different layers, and one might be covering the other. So if you wanted to dodge and burn on the same layer, you could do that as well. So I'm going to go back to layer 1. I'm going to switch to the burn tool. I'm going to have a big cursor, and I'm going to just kind of darken up the sky, really. I don't want to get the leaves too dark, but I was able to add a little bit of a pop up in the sky and darken that up. So that's dodge and burn, just like in a dark room. Not seeing much of that. Okay. All right, go ahead and close that one out and hit Don't Save. And go back to Bridge, and we're going to navigate to Chapter 8, the images, which actually is last week's downloads. So last week we downloaded Chapter 6 and Chapter 8. So we need to get back to that. That's where we were playing with the panoramas. Everybody have access to that still? That folder? Okay, good. All right. dreamyfocus.jpg. Go ahead and open that one up. All right, so this Scott Kelby that does all these books and all these pictures, you can see he's watermarked. These are all his photos. He's really a great photographer and takes amazing pictures. And he gets asked a lot how he gets this dreamy focus landscape effect. What does he do? Because his pictures all have this standard look where here's a beautiful landscape. We're looking at it. There's really good depth of field, right? The focus is strong, back as far as a natural eye focus would go. Clearly we can't see focus way in the back of this picture, but our eyes wouldn't in real life either. So it's a very strong picture. So this little special effect that he has to all of his pictures, he shares how to do it. It's 2 steps, and it's kind of weird, but it ends up looking pretty cool. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go under the filter option, and we're going to choose filter, sharpen, unsharp mask. And I showed you that last week, and we talked about how sharpening photos after you've downsized them, especially, they kind of lose their punch. And you're going to want to do this. So using the hand tool inside this preview window, you can click and drag around to change the view of what you're looking at. I would put part of that rock bridge or that foreground bridge in your preview so that you can see what you're doing. We're going to unsharpen it quite a bit, up to 120%, somewhere in there. The radius is going to stay at 1 and the threshold at 3. Those are the defaults, so that's fine. And remember I told you how you can preview this? If you click and hold down with your mouse in that preview window, you see the before, and when you let go, you see the after. So we can see how it has sharpened up this image. It's brought more detail, especially to the bridge that I'm looking at. So we're going to sharpen it to 120% and say OK. So now the picture has this sharp look. What it doesn't have is this dreamy look that he's talking about, this soft focus. So to get that, we're going to duplicate this layer. So Command J is going to duplicate that layer. And we're going to add a blur, which is really counterproductive, you would think. We're going to do Filter, up at the top, Blur, and then we're going to choose Gaussian Blur. And this is one where we can set the radius. Mine defaulted to 3.8, and when I look at my preview, it's a blurry mess. And you kind of say, I wonder what we're doing here. We're going to go 25 to 35 as our radius, and what we're going to get is a blurry mess where you just see blobs of color and you're going to think, I don't have a clue how we're going to make this work. But that's exactly what you want to do. So on really high-res cameras, you're going to have to go up higher on this blur, but we're going to stick at about 25 pixels for this one. And we're going to say, okay. Now we're going to go to our layers panel, and this blurry layer that's on top, we're going to drop the opacity of it way down, and we're going to take it down to like 30%. And the weird thing is that it's going to have this hazy, dreamy kind of focus to it, but yet it's in focus. Everything is sharp. So a lot of his landscape pictures that he displays and makes posts of, he applies this finishing touch to them and gives them a signature look for him. So that is the soft, dreamy focus if you would want to do that. Any questions? All good? All right, close that, don't save it. We're going to pop over the panoramas because we did that last week, and we are going to jump into the next tutorial, which is a funky one. It's called Tilt Shift. So from Bridge, open the image called Tilt Shift. Some of you might have this built into your camera. My Canon has a specialty zone, and I can do Tilt Shift in camera. Tilt Shift, you've maybe seen it with trains, like an aerial view of a train going over a river, and it's a real photo, but they've done weird things to it, and it ends up looking like a miniature, like a model train. They've made the focus shift and tilt, and it looks really wonky. So that's what we're going to do. Obviously, you have to have the right kind of photo, so we're starting with an aerial photo, and we're going to add this weird tilt shift to it. All right. From the filter menu, we're going to go to the blur gallery, and we've got a lot of different blurs. Lens blur, motion, radial, surface, smart. Where did tilt shift go? Dirty dog. Blur gallery. There it is. Blur gallery. Tilt shift. This is the one we want under blur gallery. All right. We are going to see some lines show up. And the middle point is our anchor of where everything is in focus, and to the right of that we have a wheel, and we can pull on that wheel, click and drag it around, and that changes the amount of blur. So from the hard line to the dotted line, how quick is the blur happening? 11, it's taking a few steps to get there. 17, 43, you can see it's really blurring out quickly, and that looks a little funky. So kind of back it off a little so it looks sort of natural-ish. We're going to play around with this. Notice this is also, as I'm playing with this circle dial right here, it's also affecting this up here, the blur. So you could do it straight from the menu. The other thing that you can do is click on this white dot, and you can spin it so that the angle is more of an angle, like this. You can take your center point and move it. So if you want to focus more on wherever you want that center point. And you can take these white bars, don't go to where the dot is on them, move out to the side, and you can click and drag those up or down. So you can make your in-focus area larger or smaller, and you can tweak the amount of blur that you get. So all of this is editable and where you position it. So depending on what look you're going for, you can make something that ends up looking like a tilt shift. When you're done, you have to go to the top of your bar or the top of your window and choose OK or cancel. There isn't one at the bottom of that panel. So tilt shift is kind of that miniaturization, that weird look. May come in handy someday, may never come in handy.
So if you're taking pictures of actual model trains, how do you make it look real? That's what my father does.
Opposite of tilt shift? I don't know.
He actually wants, no, I told him we're learning panorama. He wants me to make a backdrop for one part of his layout.
Oh, cool. Go for it.
Now he's got to figure out how to not spend $100
Yeah.
for 19.
All right, that's tilt shift. We can close that one out. Say don't save. Go back to Bridge, and the image we're going to open next is Iris Field Blur 1. And how many of you have a lens that goes down to a 1.4 or 1.8 aperture? You're the lucky ones, right? That's a specialized lens. That's an expensive lens. Or it's that, the 50, how low does that one go? 1.8? Yeah. And that's a specialized lens. That's how you get that extreme depth of field, that extreme blur. If you don't, like our kit lenses that come with your cameras, the 18 to 55 and the 55 up, they probably go down to maybe a 4 something.
I think it's like 3 point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the lowest you're going to get with that, right? So how can we fake having that awesome lens and get that iris blur or field blur? So we're going to fake it, which is quite cool. So in this picture, great picture, but everything's in focus because she's all at the same plane for the most part. And, you know, it's crisp. There's no, it'd be nice if all this was kind of soft blur and she was just the one that was super in focus. So we're going to go to the filter menu again, and we're going to go to the blur gallery, and we're going to find the iris blur. And that's going to make a pin. And same thing. We can drag the size of this. We can reshape it using all these different handles around the edge of the shape. Click and drag on those. The center ring that has the ring that we can pull for more or less blur, you can see how you can make it really dramatic. The thing that I've drawn out doesn't quite work because I don't have all of her face in focus, I don't have her elbow in focus or her lower body. I can keep playing with the size of this circle, but what I might have to do is make some extra ones because I can't quite get everything in focus that I want to be clean. So you're going to move this around, and we're going to play around with the different angles of it. Maybe if we angle this, we can make it a little bit different shape. And then we can go and we can click on and make another one. So maybe I want to make another one down here at her elbow to make sure that her elbow stays in focus because it wasn't before. So I'm making another one, and make sure you'd want to match that same amount of blur so that one isn't more or less blurry than the other. Make sure we get all of her dress in focus and add one up at the top of her head to make sure that stays crisp. So by adding a handful of these different pinpoints, we can control the amount of blur outside of her and the amount of blur or the radius. So where that second, you have your center point, and then out in one direction, any one direction, you have a dot. That's where the blur is going to start. So if you want to give it less time to get to that blur, you can drag those dots out as well. So by adding these different pins and upping, you can see how much blur we added to the background. The one by her elbow I'm not real happy with because there's too much that's in focus down here. Reposition that somehow. Whoa! Not so good. Little too extreme. So that is the iris blur option. One more from this chapter that we're going to do. Go back to Bridge and open up the image called Lens Flare. And this one you can tell was taken at a low aperture because there's a big depth of field. There's a lot of blur behind her, so the aperture was a very low number to get all that blur behind her. And the feature that we want to do here is make it kind of look like you have some lens flare or those sunspots coming into it. It's kind of a, I don't know, I'll show it to you and then you can decide what you think about it. All right, we need to create a blank new layer, so go down and click on a blank layer in your layers panel down here. Press the letter D on your keyboard to default your foreground and background swatch chips to black and white. And after we've done that, we're going to press Option Delete to fill our layer with solid black. So Option Delete fills with your foreground color, which happens to be black in this case. So we have a black layer on top. We're going to go back up under the filter menu, and we're going to go down under Render and then Lens Flare. So Filter, Render, Lens Flare. And we have a variety of lens flares. So out of a 50 to 300 millimeter zoom lens, this is the look you might get. A 35 millimeter prime might give you this. So just scroll through them and see what different flares you have. The one I'm going to use is the 50 to 300. The brightness control affects the brightness of the lens flare. It's at 100%. That's great. And we're going to click OK. So now we have this cool lens flare sitting on a black layer. Still doesn't quite work with our picture below, doesn't make a lot of sense. So we need it to blend with our image. Go to the Layers panel, and the layer blending mode of this layer 1, we're going to change it from normal to screen. And what that does is screen out all the black pixels and leave only the bright pixels. Now that cool lens flare is showing through, but you probably want to move it. So take the Move tool, and then you can move this around in your image wherever you want it to be.
Right there.
Okay. So it's the concept of having light get into your lens and kind of make those sun flares. If you don't like it, you can mask it out, you can change the opacity of it, you can do whatever you want. It's kind of distracting across your face, but if you actually had that lens flare come in, you have to decide what you want to do with it. If you look at your layers panel, I've moved mine to the point where I have my black layer is up at the top left corner. And if you end up having some edges that kind of show through and you want to, like you can see some sort of difference, a hard edge here, I don't. But if you needed to do that, you could add a mask to this layer 1, and you could paint out those hard edges and pull down the opacity if you could see them. But again, I don't see them, so I think we're good. All right, close and done. So that's a smattering of the tutorials that I wanted to share with you. What I want you to do now is pick any tutorial from chapter 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. I think those are all the ones that we've downloaded images for. Flip through, find one tutorial that looks cool that you want to try. Don't do HDR, we still have those to do together as a group. I want you to pick one of those tutorials and work through it right now. And you're going to be sharing that with me in Blackboard. So look through those chapters, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. Find one we haven't done, and go ahead and do a tutorial. I'll give you some class time right now before we move on. And just a sec. I have one book. Hold on.